right?
Yes, it's coming up right now. Let's.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Dr. Adia, welcome.
Oh,
So we're in the midst of letting people into the Zoom session. However, those of you joining us on YouTube and Facebook, thanks for joining us today. This is part 2. If you want to watch part 1, you can find it on our Facebook for the Baha'i Center of Clearwater, YouTube, Clearwater Baha'is. So feel free to take a look at that as well. You don't have to watch them just this moment if this is your first time watching, but please feel free to go and watch part 1 as well. Now, we are hosting this here in Clearwater, Florida. This is from the LSA of the Baha'is of Clearwater. And this is in place of the Sunday activities that are normally hosted in-house. And we are doing them on Zoom as we continue through this coronavirus pandemic. So now we have a beautiful introduction for our great speaker and also the great presentation. So we're going to go through that while we have people also joining in through Zoom right now. Dr. Hussein Adia was born and raised in Neyriz, Iran. He is a 6th-generation Baha'i whose ancestors figure among the first in Neyriz to accept the Babi and the Baha'i faith. Dr. Adia immigrated to the United States as a young man of 17, and like many immigrants, he was seeking a better life in America. He worked and attended college in the New York area, and he eventually completed a master's degree in European intellectual history, and he received his doctorate in education from the University of Massachusetts. Now, Dr. Adia has a distinguished career in education in New York. His proudest achievement is to have been one of the founders and the assistant headmaster of the Harlem Preparatory School, a world-renowned charter high school for disadvantaged students. The school is credited with helping numerous people to rise from poverty to a better life. Dr. Adia also served as Director of Educational Programs at Fordham University. Now, of course, he's in New York now, and that's where we're streaming from. He has served as treasurer of that spiritual assembly in New York for the city of New York, for the Baha'is there, for many years, and several times has represented his area at the U.S. Baha'i National Convention. And in addition to that, he's written beautiful books of which you can find on his websites. His latest book, The Foreigner, From an Iranian Village to New York City. It tells a story of an Iranian Baha'i immigrant to the United States in a series of moving and humorous episodes set against the backdrop of a changing Iran, the plight of the Baha'is there, and the tumult of the 60s and the 70s in the US. So if you want to also find out about Neyriz, he's posted a beautiful website about it. It's www.neyriz.org, Nayriz. I check it out. It's not that it's not something that you probably would have known otherwise. So I'm letting you know now. www.nayriz.org. You should really check it out. And also the website for Harlem Prep School. It's www.harlem, HARLEM, prep, PREP, school, SCHOOL.com. You can check those out. Now, this week's topic, Abdul Baha in America, NYC, Part 2. Of all the historical, religious, and cultural events in the history of the United States, the arrival of Abdul Baha in 1912 was the most important one of all. Many people from all facets of society had the honor of meeting him to attend his talks, as well as the benefit of learning from his wisdom. And they were able to witness his benevolence and his humility. Their encounter with Abdul Baha was life-altering. He touched the depths of their souls and awakened them spiritually. The presentation today intends to bring friends closer to this unique station of Abdul Baha, whom Baha'u'llah calls the mystery of God and the center of his covenant. With that being said, Dr. Adia, welcome. We are happy to have you speak today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. It's wonderful to be here again Actually, I wish I could be really in where you are right now. While you were introducing me, I turn around and look outside. It's snowing in New York. Temperature for last few days been in 20s, and even for me that I hate to stay inside, last night Tatiana and her husband offered to take me out and go for a walk. I couldn't believe it. I refused to go with them. And this is very unusual for me. And that shows how cold it is right now. But you folks are very lucky.
We definitely are. It is not anywhere close to freezing here. It is like about at the lowest 60 degrees.
And lowest, oh, my heart goes for you. Lowest is 60 degrees, yes. Lowest here was 19 yesterday or the day before. Last week.
Good number. It's a good number.
Yes. Last week, we talked extensively about the Abdul Baha's trip to America. And I promised I left three major subjects alone because they needed more concentration and more attention. And those subjects were the Covenant, the Peace Conference, and Unity Gathering. This was really the three main accomplishments of Abdul Baha while he was in America. Speaking of accomplishment, I'd like to mention this. In one of my presentations, I don't know where it was. Lately, I have become Mr. Zoom. Somebody asked and mentioned that Shoghi Effendi has said that the mission of Abdul Baha to America was a failure. I was so shocked to hear that I always thought Shoghi Effendi talked so gloriously about Abdul Baha's trip to America and the success of his trip. Then later on, when I give it more thought, and I was wondering where this idea come from. First, most likely, this statement, if it's true, has come from the pilgrim notes. During the Shoghi Effendi, people would go there and they spend hours with him and they take lots of notes. And when they come back, they put it together and sometimes they distribute it and they publish it. And in lots of summer school, Greenacre is one of them, they have collection of all those pilgrim notes and all that. It may be in one of those notes that Shoghi Effendi has said that. And I have a feeling the reason he said that was Abdul Baha did his best while he was here, or even when he was in Europe, try to warn and try to advise that somehow, some way to prevent the coming of the war. Because the world power at that point in 1912, 1913, 1914, it was like the whole Europe was ready to explode because the armies were facing each other between Germany and England, Germany and against Russia and France and England and Austria-Hungary and Italians, Mussolini and all that. No, not Mussolini. And America being indifferent at that point through Woodrow Wilson. So this was quite a chaotic situation, and some peace-loving people, including Abdul Baha, were doing their best to warn and try to prevent this war. And so this lady's or Shoghi Effendi's statement that the mission of Abdul Baha to America was a failure, perhaps is a reference to this idea that the war was not prevented and eventually it happened and all the damages that we experienced. Actually, let me just tell you some statistic I collected. Speaking of war, I don't know how I end up starting my presentation on this subject. I found out that during the First World War, 8,528,000 soldiers died. 21 million of them were wounded. 7 million individuals had disappeared. 6,800,000 civilians were dead. And only in Russia, right after Russian Revolution, 2 million Russians died, and 5 million died from starvation. Can you imagine how staggering are these figures? And so that could be, when we refer that they couldn't prevent the war, that could be the reason. Abdul Baha came to America after Young Turk Revolution that freed all the political prisoners. And at that point, around 1908, Abdul Baha was considered a political prisoner. And so he and his family and his friends, they were all free. They were in prison or in exile for almost 55 years. And from the time, I think he was 8, 9 years old, when his father was exiled to Baghdad and they left Persia until he was free eventually in Akka and Haifa in 1908. He made a series of trips to Egypt and Europe before, and it's so interesting that he came to America in 1912. This was 2 years before the First World War. And it was quite significant because if he would have delayed it anymore, it would be impossible for him to come to the state. And if he would have delayed to come after the war, he was much older, and he was a kind of sick man at that point, and it was only a couple of years before his ascension and his death. So that would not be possible either. So the timing was perfect in 1912. What he wanted to accomplish before he leaves Haifa, to finish the building, the shrine of Bab, and interment of his body with Anis. And that was accomplished. This was one of the major accomplishments that he did, Abdul Baha. And this was, of course, the request and advice of Baha'u'llah, his father, that at what spot and where he should do this. His trip to Egypt and then coming to America was kept a secret, because with the covenant breaker trying to find his authority and his work, and with the enemy of the faith all over, he has to keep it a secret. And the only one who knew that he's living and he's coming to America was his sister, Greatest Holy Leaf. He went to got on a ship called Cedric, and I think it was around late March when he left there, and it took him 17 days. He went to Naples, Italy, and then from there he came to America. His presence on the boat was quite interesting, because right around that time there was a battle going on between the Greece and the Turks. And anybody who looked Eastern, they thought they are Turks. So the first reaction toward them being on the boat was very negative. But then the captain of the ship made some arrangements. Abdul Baha made a few presentations while he was sailing, and that helped a lot. Another sad incident that happened while they were traveling, it happened in Naples. Shoghi Effendi, his grandson, was supposed to come with him to America, but then somehow, some way in Naples, they prevented him, and they mentioned that he has this illness in his eyes, trachoma. And at that point, the American very concerned about infectious disease, not to come to America. So they would have all kind of control. I guess they wish they could have the same thing with COVID now, but they didn't. So whether this was true or was the work of the covenant breaker, they didn't want this young boy to go with his grandfather. Anyway, it was a very disappointing occasion. The Baha'is of America sent lots of money. I think at that point, $15,000, $20,000 for Abdul Baha could come on the Titanic. But then he turned the money down. He asked them to give it to the poor, and he paid for himself and came on Cedric. They were very anxious to have Abdul Baha in America. They were going to pilgrims, numerous number of them from 1898, and they were all begging and asking Abdul Baha for a trip and a visit to America. But there was a great deal of disunity at that point in this country among the Baha'is. And how this disunity started, this would lead me to the subject of covenant. There was a man by the name Khairullah, which we're going to see his picture later, who I think he was Syrian. He was a businessman, and he was very charismatic and a wonderful Baha'i teacher. He came with another person by name Haddad. They came to America. They started to have some business in New York. Then he went to Chicago. Then he went to Wisconsin. And he was able to attract large number of people to the Baha'i faith. And this was very unusual. This was also because he twisted and he changed some of the principle of the Baha'i faith in order to appeal to general public. For example, many people thought that the reincarnation is part of the Baha'i principle, which was not true. Many people believe that some of this tablet that came from Abdul Baha to America, it came through telepathy. Many people believe that the astrology was introduced. So all this kind of thing he was using in order to attract people, which has nothing to do with the faith. And numerous tablets and letters Abdul Baha was writing, and a Baha'i teacher that he was sending to America was useful, but not that much. So in 1898, a woman by the name Phoebe Hearst, I'm sorry that I may have mentioned this thing last week to some of you, and I hope you don't get bored. If you're bored, just close your eyes, go to sleep. I will wake you up later. Khairullah, along with a bunch of other Baha'is, but they went to Haifa, and a woman by the name Phoebe Hearst paid for their trip. She was a very rich woman. She was the wife of a great senator from California. And some of you who like old movies, I suggest you see the movie called Citizen Kane that Orson Welles played in that. So that's a good movie to see and to watch. So later on, of course, Phoebe Hearst left the faith because I think people like Khairullah and Sohrab and others were trying to take out. This is the trouble that we have sometime in the faith, that they approach some folks which they have money and things like this, and in the name of the faith, they're trying to take advantage of situation. So Khairullah met Abdul Baha, and in the course of conversation, he told Abdul Baha that I'm willing and I like to take care of the West affairs, and anything happening in the West to the Baha'i community, I would take care of it. And you take care of the East. Can you imagine the goals this man had and all that? So this was beginning, and of course, then while he was there, he met with Abdul Baha's brother, who was a covenant breaker, and all that. So when he came back, a whole series of disunity and friction started between those who would go to Haifa and come back and talk about how wonderful Abdul Baha was, and those who were sticking with Khairullah. But eventually, I think Abdul Baha sent a scholar like Abul Faza'el and another one by name Kermani and others who came and tried to educate the American Baha'i community. Abdul Baha arrived on April 11, 1912 to New York Harbor. A large number of Baha'is were by the Hudson River to welcoming him. He moved to a hotel in 72nd Street called Ansonia on the 7th floor. He had 2-bedroom apartment, and he stayed there for a while. Then he moved to another location on the west side of Manhattan. It's so interesting that most of the time that Abdul Baha was in New York, he either spent his time on the west side of, upper west side of New York, or he spent in the Greenwich Village area because of Julia Thompson and others who were living here. And occasionally he would go to Brooklyn because at that time, Brooklyn was really where action was, where some of the rich people used to live and all that. A number of wonderful Baha'i, including Howard McNutt and others, were living in Brooklyn, and he would go and stay there and meet with the Baha'is. So while he was here, the second or third day of his arrival, am I doing all right? Second day of his arrival, he had a large gathering in the Church of Ascension, 2,000 people attended. The meeting was arranged by a fellow named Percy Grant, who was the minister of the church, who was a close friend of Julia Thompson. And in that meeting, can you imagine a prisoner after 55 years suddenly get on the boat, come to America, next day that he's in this country, go to a church, and all of a sudden 2,000 people are there, and he has to give a lecture and give a talk. And it's amazing. He entered the church and he went and sat right on the bishop chair, what was very unusual because this chair was always reserved for the big shot, the bishop. But he sat there, and after he was introduced, he got up and gave this amazing talk. Of course, we have a copy of that about the Station of Christ, the Station of Baha'u'llah, the principle of the faith, and all that. It's amazing that he often, whenever he goes to some of these church and places, he goes to synagogue and try to prove the validity of Jesus. He goes to churches, try to prove the validity of Prophet Muhammad. So this was the basic theme of his presentation. Either in the peace conferences, he would talk about the peace and upcoming war, or in churches and synagogue and other occasions, he would talk about the religious matter, coming of the Christ and return of the Christ. He went to Columbia University, gave a major talk about the reconciliation and relation between science and religion, which was a magnificent talk. We're really indebted to two persons. One is Julia Thompson. The other one is Mahmoud Zarghani, Mirza Mahmoud Zarghani. These two individuals have kept such a beautiful diary of the time that Abdul Baha was in America. In detail, what Abdul Baha said, where did he go, what did he do? So this volume of the work of these two individuals is really give us a great collection of historical facts. And of course, you know that the famous book, Promulgation of the World Peace, is a collection of all Abdul Baha's talk when he was in America. In my presentation, I try to concentrate as much as I can on New York right now, because if we get involved in his trip to America altogether, God help us. You have to listen to me for the next year or so. As I mentioned, the station of Abdul Baha was a bit unknown among the Baha'is, even non-Baha'is in this country. The newspaper, New York Herald Tribune and others, they would claim that the prophet said he is not prophet. Because one of the things that they all said that he's a prophet and he is return of Jesus Christ. And even though he emphasized and constantly repeat that, believe me, I'm not return of Christ, I'm Abdul Baha, I'm just interpreter of Baha'u'llah's writing, but they would not accept it. They said, no, you look like a Jesus and you must be Jesus. So this was really what was going on. There's a tablet called Tablet of Branch, which is one of the tablets of Baha'u'llah that describe fully at who is going to succeed him. And then there's also another will and testament of Baha'u'llah called Kitab Ahdi that also describe the covenant and successive position of Abdul Baha, and also in the Holy Book of Aqdas. So there were numerous records of who will succeed Baha'u'llah. And this is unusual, as you all know, in the history of religion altogether. But in order to make this very clear to the friends and to the others, they said in one occasion, Julia Thompson, who I mentioned, she wrote the diary, was a great painter. And she was very anxious to paint the face of Abdul Baha. So they arranged 6 sessions that Baha'u'llah had to sit and she would do the sketching and painting. And Baha'u'llah was, of course, would say, oh, I'm sleepy, I'm tired. And Juliet would say, okay, close your eyes, go to sleep. I can paint anyway.
Yeah, you mean Abdul Baha, right?
What's that?
You mean Abdul Baha. You were saying Baha'u'llah.
Did I say Baha'u'llah?
Yeah.
Well, wishful thinking. It would be great if we could do a drawing of Baha'u'llah. So Abdul Baha, yes, you're right. So on the fourth session, when Abdul Baha was telling him that please show the certitude of me to God in your painting. Or another occasion, I think I mentioned that you make me sleepy. What are you doing? And the poor Juliet was complaining, how can I draw a face of God? This was all the feeling and interaction that was going on. But I said in the fourth session, something unusual happened. In that session, while Juliet was painting, Lua Gitzinger was also in the room. Suddenly they said Abdul Baha opened his eyes and he turned to Lua Gitzinger and he said, I appoint you, Lua, as a herald of the covenant. And I am the covenant. And this is the ordinance of Baha'u'llah. And nobody can dispute that. I said this was such a majestic statement, and his body and his face was beaming with light. Juliet started to cry, and Lua was laughing. He didn't know what to say, what to do. So this was the time that Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, officially declared his mission or his station to be a center of covenant. And he also mentioned that New York is
Hello?
Mhm.
We lost your sound. Could you repeat what you were saying in the past, I think, 5 seconds, please?
What did he say?
Just the scene of Abdul Baha and Juliet and beaming the covenant.
Shall I repeat?
Just the last few seconds.
Oh, yeah. I mentioned that the occasion was so majestic that Juliet stopped painting and she started to cry. And then Lua, who was quite confused and didn't know what to say, what to do, she started to get hilarious and laugh that no, she's appointed as a herald of covenant. This is very unusual setting. And I want to know, I'm right, I just finished writing an article about Julia Thompson for the Baha'i blog. And I always thought that Julia Thompson is one of the disciples of Abdul Baha. I found out, no, Lua Gitzinger was appointed by Shoghi Effendi as a disciple of Abdul Baha, but not Julia Thompson. What happened eventually? All this confusion was going on. Who is Abdul Baha? What's his station? This and that, until 1934, when Shoghi Effendi in the book Dispensation of Baha'u'llah clearly explained his station, and he started, I think, by saying that he is an interpreter of Baha'u'llah's writing, he is the mystery of God, he is the center of covenant. What else is he? And a few other titles that I don't remember. But as you know, Abdul Baha always called himself, the other title that Abdul Baha, and the people refer to him as master, which is a really translation of the word agha, because in the family and the household of Baha'u'llah, they all refer to Abdul Baha as agha. That became master. Okay, so this basically deals with the subject of covenant. And because as I said, they were hoping and they were anxious to have an occasion to celebrate Abdul Baha's birthday. What happened? Abdul Baha was born on the same day that the Blessed Bab has declared his mission. I think it's May 23rd, 1844. And Abdul Baha would tell them, no, there's no celebration for my birthday, that day belonged to Bab. And since they insisted, they said, okay, let's make an occasion, we call it Day of Covenant. And I think at that point was May 26, somehow with the Badi calendar and all that, I think has become November 24, November 26, November 24. And it was on that day that the subject of covenant was confirmed, the unity of the friend was more established, and they organized this very fancy and wonderful banquet in one of the great hotels at that time, Great Northern, I think it was on 57th Street. And 300-400 people were attending. The flag of America and Persia was there. The General Consul of Persia and Turkish government were present. And Abdul Baha arrived in the banquet, in the gathering. Everybody stand up and welcoming him. He went and shake hands with everybody, and then the dinner was served. And the only sad part was that they did not allow any black person to join the gathering. So Abdul Baha made the arrangement that the following day in the Kenny's house, all those black folks who were not allowed to be invited and serve dinner privately. The other subject that I'd like to spend some time and talk about is his attendance in the peace conference. There were two brothers, Smiley brothers, who were Quakers, and they were very rich. I don't know how peace-loving people always get rich. Somehow God bless them, and I see an example of them right now on the screen. So what happened was they bought this most beautiful place on Lake Mohonk. They built 9 fancy buildings and conference room, hotel room. I've been there a number of times. It's absolutely beautiful. And what they did every year, they had this major peace conference, because they were also involved in the organization called New York Peace Society, who actually was one of the oldest and biggest peace organization in America. So they have invited President Taft was one of their speakers, Andrew Carnegie was another speaker. So at this time, they invited Abdul Baha to make a presentation. And actually, often when the reporter would ask Abdul Baha, why did you come to America and what is the purpose of a visit? He always would say, I have been invited to be a speaker in such a conference. And it's so interesting for when you go to that particular site, you see the picture of Abdul Baha along with the other speaker, President Taft, Andrew Carnegie, and number of quite, I don't remember right now, dignitary and important speaker who were present. 200-300 people were in attendance. His talk was distributed and printed and published in major newspapers. He stayed a couple of extra days in the hotel, spent time with the Smiley brothers and others. And there's a cute thing happened. He was very anxious to give a gift to the Smiley brothers. And he had a beautiful Persian carpet that he had brought from Haifa. But then they forgot to bring it. So he asked Dr. Baghdadi to quickly, a night before, to go back to New York and get that carpet and bring it there. And the way this poor Baghdadi described his trip, that how overnight he was jumping from one train to, those days was not that easy to travel back and forth. From one train to other train, and eventually he got there. Then when he came back, he had to jump. He introduced himself, this mailman who had his own carriage, and as a doctor. So the mailman thought he has to go see a patient. So quickly said, okay, doctor, jump. And so he got on the carriage. And the last moment at 10 a.m., as Abdul Baha was shaking the hands of a Smiley brother, the carpet arrived and he was given to them. And that was the happy occasion. Just to celebrate this wonderful trips and all that, Abdul Baha arranged for a great luncheon in a place in New Jersey that belonged to a man by name Roy Wilhelm. Roy Wilhelm was in the coffee business, very rich American Baha'i, and he had a beautiful house in New Jersey with a big lawn and all that. So in that particular day, I think it was June 29, they invited all the Baha'is to come for a picnic. Abdul Baha helped himself to do cooking, most likely some rice and chicken and whatever else was available. The food was served. Then they had some kind of sherbet. Then they spent the rest of the day, and he gave a major, major talk in that occasion. And that talk, if you attend they call it Abdul Baha's souvenir. If you go to that meeting, they always read that speech of Abdul Baha for that occasion. And it's a music and it's singing and dancing and kids and all that. Yeah, it's a very happy occasion, remembering Abdul music, there were flowers, and this was really a wonderful day. There was a chance of rain, but thanks God, the rain did not occur, so they could celebrate the occasion. This was in June 29. I mentioned, I think, November 26. He had that fancy banquet party. On December 5th, he said goodbye to all the friends in New York. And I think he got on the boat called Celtic and he left. And I think his last word to the New York Baha'is and other, it was so significant and so beautiful that I wish you would all go and read it and educate yourself. That he said, I did my best. I traveled all over the country. I give the message of Baha'u'llah. Now it's up to you to follow and to finish the job. Something about Abdul Baha, it's amazing when I was working on the book about him and his trip to America, you find so many amazing and interesting things about this man. You know, at this point, in Haifa, this research department has a collection of 18,000 tablets by Abdul Baha. Can you imagine this man, right? 18. Can you imagine if he had access to internet, what he would do just by sending this tablet and letter, 18,000 of them, full of praising, full of encouragement, advice. He had a great sense of humor, Abdul Baha. I know so many stories about him. Actually, I wrote an article about Abdul Baha's sense of humor that you can check it out on BahaiTeaching.org. He would cry whenever they would talk about the martyrdom of some early Babis and Baha'is. I think there was a guy called Abdul Baha Shirazi, that the way they killed him, they put him in the front of the cannon and they blow him up. And when he was describing the way they killed him, they said the tear was coming from his eyes. Or when he shared a story and the humorous thing, and he often would say, humor was very important in the life of those early Baha'is. And because Abdul Baha has said himself that it was the sense of humor of the friends in Akka while we were in prison that saved our sanity. Because they were trying to entertain and try to encourage each other and try to make life less miserable. And they said often at nighttime, even Baha'u'llah would join the groups and they would participate in there. Meshkin Ghalam was another character. Oh, I wish I had time. Maybe if the folks in Florida invite me again, I would talk about some of these Baha'i humor things that we would discuss it later. And with yes, Tatiana. Thank you. I have an assistant here who sits here, and it's amazing. She has a body language, and she points her finger, doing this, do that, and I thought, like a good man, I follow her advice, and so she said, okay, I think we should go to the PowerPoints. So I think we have a few pictures that we're going to show, and I'm going to go over that, and then we answer some questions that you may have. Go ahead, my good friend, John.
Jeremiah.
Yes, we're in the process of putting the PowerPoint screen up.
Okay, sure.
In the meantime, I want to ask you a question that the audience would benefit from. So, you know, Abdul Baha visited in the 1900s. When he came, he visited quite a bit of the country, including New York City.
Yes.
Now, the question is, if in your thoughts, the work that he did in showing the equal treatment of all the people he met, how it affected people in America who saw him and his actions, how he acted, what the representation of how he treated different people when it was against social norms, how it affected how Americans thought, and how it introduced new ideas.
That's very good. The number of people that Abdul Baha met, whether it was former President Teddy Roosevelt, whether it was Andrew Carnegie, whether it was Tom Edison, whether he was Admiral Perry, the discoverer or explorer of North Pole, or numerous other people, or a great writer and painter like Khalil Gibran, or who else? I can think of many others that Abdul Baha met. It's amazing. At the same time, he would meet people. There was a guy who, I think it's Ed Mortensen, who traveled under a railroad machine or a cabinet to go to Greenacre to visit Abdul Baha. He was a hoodlum, he was a thief from Minnesota. And he was really, when he got there, he was covered with mud and dirt and all that. And reception that he got from Abdul Baha was so kindly and so unusual that it won his heart and completely transferred this man. This thief later on became a trustee of the financial affair of the faith. During the Second World War, when they wanted to send the money to Haifa, because there was this man who was a former thief and who has spent many years in prison, was responsible for transferring money, cash money, to Haifa. And so whether he would meet with him, he meet with the writers, he meet with the scholars, he meet with the politician. So they were all, for him, they were all part of humanity. The treatment that he gave for Black and minority, and the treatment that he got for the woman in numerous occasions. At that point, 1912, I want to know that that even women was even 8 years even before.
Could you repeat that really quick? Before you said 8 years, you cut off. Could you say that again, please?
Yeah, I said in 1912, the woman in this country, America, did not even have the right to vote. And they only got the right to vote, I think, was in 1920s, 8 years after Abdul Baha left this country. And it's something cute. I remember this American woman. Sometimes they could get pushy. Abdul Baha was not hungry, and then this lady, I think her name was Lady Blomfield, insisted that he should eat some dinner, and he keeps saying that I'm not hungry, I cannot eat. But she insisted. Eventually, he had few bites, and he said, "Can you imagine the two emperors of Persia and Ottoman Empire could not push me around, and this lady is pushing me around and forced me to eat." So this man is an interesting guy. He came to the faith again through Khairullah. He's the one who put all the book of promulgation of the world peace together. For a while, he was a little bit shaky because he still had some attachment to Khairullah, and that was his old teacher. This is Lua Gitzinger. Why are you going so fast? Lua Gitzinger was quite a lady, and she really helped the faith. Was one of the most wonderful teachers. And I think in some occasion, either in Europe, I read someplace that Abdul Baha asked her to go and meet with the Muzaffar ad-Din Shah, the king of Persia, was spending time in Europe somehow. And Abdul Baha instructed Lua to make arrangement to go and meet him and talk about the suffering and the plight of the Persian Baha'is. And she did that, and is recorded. So this is Lua. She's also disciple of Abdul Baha, and she's the one that, as I mentioned earlier, Abdul Baha appointed her as a herald of the covenant. Next. This is Juliet Thompson is painting the face of Mrs. Coolidge, President Coolidge wife, and this painting is in the White House. Juliet was quite a talented painter. She studied in Washington, a very famous art school, and then she went to Paris, and she was going to Sorbonne studying painting, and he was in there that he met May Bowles, mother of Ruhi Khanum, Thomas Brackwell, then Dreyfus, and a whole bunch of others, and Mason Remy and a few others. Abdul Baha was encouraging Julia Thompson to marry Mason Remy, but she didn't like him. I think for some reason she didn't want to marry him, and then And even in one occasion, she mentioned to Abdul Baha that I really don't want to marry this man. You know, somehow imagine if she would have married him, probably this poor man would not go in the route that he went and then claim that he's a second guardian and all that nonsense. Next. Oh, this is the painting of that Julia did of Abdul Baha. Unfortunately, the original painting has, I think, was destroyed in a fire or somehow disappeared. But then we have a very close photo of the painting, and this is one of them. It's a beautiful painting. Howard Colby Eyes was a Unitarian minister. He met Abdul Baha, I think, second or third day of his arrival in New York. And it's amazing that they said the way she described it in the book, Portal of Freedom. It's a beautiful book. You should all read it. In the book, he described how in the large crowd of the people who have come to visit Abdul Baha on that occasion, Abdul Baha came toward him and touched his face and gave him a hug and kiss, and then sat down with him and they had a conversation. And it's a beautiful, dramatic book. And actually his granddaughter, which I don't remember her name, for many years was the member of National Spiritual Assembly of America. Oh, this is the troublemaker. This is Ibrahim Khairullah, the one that I mentioned, that the very successful teacher in America, but unfortunately, toward the end, he broke the covenant, and most likely he's in hell.
Well, we could at least say he wasn't a very successful businessman either. So he was trying to make it in the world, and apparently nothing that he tried worked. So
right.
he commingled his Baha'i activities with that, trying to make money in that way.
Take advantage of Baha'is. Yes, this is the translators of Abdul Baha. He did quite a good job in while he was under the covenant. But then this is the problem with some of these folks who become well-known Baha'i teachers and things like this. Somehow, I think they get mixed up. They think that the affection and attention that Baha'is is showing toward them, they think is because of them. They don't realize the affection and attention is toward the faith and toward the teaching of Baha'u'llah. And they are only a channel, or they are just a means. But then when they get mixed up, head that they are some piece of something, I don't want to mention what. So, and this is another one that after Abdul Baha's ascension, he started to create problem for New York Assembly. He was a very successful, of course, teachers and writers and all that. And he was not willing to obey the decision of Assembly, New York Assembly. And Shoghi Effendi, even though he wanted so much to keep him in the faith, but was very patient with him from 1921 to I think to 1928. It was extensive communication between him and New York Assembly and National Assembly and Shoghi Effendi. But eventually, I think either he left the faith or they kicked him out. So he set up an organization called New History Society and another one called Caravan. And he was very active and had a bunch of followers and people who went with him. That's Sohrab. Next. The guy on the left was a big help to Abdul Baha, Mr. Ali Qoli Khan. He was a Persian charge d'affaires in Washington, and lots of meetings I think Abdul Baha had with the higher echelon of American government, most likely was organized through him. Ali Qoli Khan was his name. It's the peace conference that I made a reference to. Oh, this is a beautiful place that I suggested. If you ever come to New York as a visitors, the this is a wonderful place to go and stay. It's kind of expensive, but you may get a deal, or maybe a stay close by and just go have dinner or lunch there and visit the place. And it's so funny, sometimes Baha'is, they know exactly what room Abdul Baha stayed. So when they go and make a reservation, they always ask for the same room. They figure out by sleeping in the same room, maybe they get some blessing. But I don't know about Tatiana, but others believe in that. Oh, these are the two brothers who were Quakers. It's amazing, you don't hear much about Quakers these days, but in 19th century and early 20th century, Quakers was quite a force in this country. The church and their activity and their peace-loving approach was really a big thing that was popular those days. Next. Oh, that's the rock I mentioned. That's a gorgeous rock. At the last moment, arrived in the peace conference and was given to the Smiley brothers. The man who went and got this rock and brought it back, Dr. Baghdadi. Try to Google him or do some research. He was a wonderful servant of Baha'u'llah, and I think he died in Augusta, Georgia. Augusta, Georgia. Yeah. And since then, every year, the Baha'is in that town on his day, they have memorial. They invite the speakers. I think Tahir, my wife, one year was a speaker, and was a wonderful man to remember, Baghdadi. Next. The guy at the center is the one who I mentioned. He was in the coffee business, and he was during Shoghi Effendi time. Actually, this man was a great help to Shoghi Effendi, and eventually he was appointed as a hand of a cause. I don't know whether during his life or after his death. And this is him, Roy Wilhelm. This is the gathering that they had in New Jersey. Do you notice how many women are there? It's unbelievable. I think that this faith of Baha'u'llah in this country is basically have been strengthened and established by these wonderful ladies. You read the story of Martha Root and General Jack, and then the whole bunch of Julia Thompson and Laura Gitzinger and Mildred Motahede. These are some wonderful ladies who established the faith in this country. And this was the gathering in West Englewood, or also known as Teaneck, New Jersey. Yeah, this is some of the lady on the left, I think, is the Laura Gitzinger, and the guy with the beard is, I think, is Ahmad Sohrab, if I'm not mistaken. That's the banquet that they organized. Was supposed to be very fancy one. Everyone dressed up so sharp, and they came and they had a good time celebrating Day of Covenant. They still actually, Day of Covenant, at least in New York, they take it very seriously, and they make a big thing out of it. So actually, we have a point of information, if you're interested. In one of the occasions of a Day Covenant, I think Tatiana and others organized the program at the Baha'i Center, and somebody has recorded and is in YouTube. Is probably in my channel. It's called Day of Covenant Celebration. It's a really, I think they arranged to read his speech and talk and pray and music. So if you want to know more about that particular Day of Covenant, I think is a good place to go.
And website.
And we can go also to website, Abdul Baha's in New York website. Okay. This probably is the last picture of Abdul Baha as he was living in New York. This picture taking of Abdul Baha is interesting. He was very reluctant at the earlier days to anybody take his picture. But then in some occasion, I don't know whether it was New York or someplace else, this photographer, this newspaper man, came and take his picture, and Abdul Baha said, please don't do this, don't take my picture. I don't want that. But the guy told Abdul Baha, they have sent me here to take your picture. If I don't take your picture and I go back there, it's a good chance they fire me. So Abdul Baha said, really, they fire you if you don't take my picture? He said, yes, they fired me. So, okay, take as many pictures as you want, if that's the case. So that was the beginning of taking picture of Abdul Baha. And I think he began to like it himself too. So he then there's a whole bunch of, so I have such a beautiful picture of him available all over. But we should not distribute it. We are discouraged of using Abdul Baha's picture too often in the social media and this and distributed occasionally for presentation is all right. Oh, there is one more thing. While he was in New York, Abdul Baha made a film, which is also available on a special occasion, you should watch it. And there is a recording of his voice that he's chanting. It's so beautiful, really, that chanting, Mujdabaut, Mujdabaut, glad tiding, glad tiding. I have heard that number of times. So that's also took place. I think it was at Howard McNaught House in Brooklyn that happened. Yes, Tatiana, you want to say something?
No.
Okay, that's basically not bad. My God, I talked for 1 hour. That's a record. Okay, so now I'm ready, John. If there is any hot question, I'd be glad to answer.
That was a lot of good knowledge, indeed. We actually wanted to, I know this is about New York, but you brought up how he introduced ideas that transformed how Americans think. And one of the first things I thought about was Corinne True in Chicago, where I bet she was probably in New York at one point too, but Corinne True is the person who's the mother of the Baha'i Temple of the West. She's the one who made it possible to get built and so forth, and was one of the champions of the process of getting it approved by Abdul Baha and being built. So I understand, as you were mentioning, the women's suffrage movement was still a thing back then. Women couldn't really vote back then. And here you had Abdul Baha saying, this woman is going to be leading all of these men in building one of the most holy places in the United States at the time. And
That's very true.
this change to social norms to conform with the Baha'i teachings is one of the many episodes of Abdul Baha. And I know you mentioned a few of them today here. Can you think of another story where Abdul Baha did something like this that resulted in showing how the Baha'i teachings in action are so different from the social norms of the day? And how, of course, people, they yearn for this change too. It's not that it's just different.
I met Edna True, the daughter of Corona True, on numerous occasions. She was a counselor, and she used to come to New York on occasion. And she would tell the story of her mother and of how the whole temple things material. You know, I think they only paid $16,000 for that piece of land on the Lake Michigan to build a temple. That beautiful.
What a bargain!
It was quite a 16,000.
Well, how much was it? Is that in modern dollars? Like if you were to convert it to today's money, or was it back then? Because if it was back then, maybe it wasn't so cheap. I think that's actually expensive.
16,000 was most likely was lots of money. Oh, speaking of $16,000, you know, I live in Manhattan, and the story goes that Manhattan was bought by the white people from India for $27. Have you heard that story? Any of you?
I know that they gave items that now are worth. They were worth then at $27, but they gave him, I think, like pelts and items that were requested.
The new historian revisionists, they believe that this white man approached this Indian and said, "I'd like to buy the island for $27. Would you sell it to me?" The Indian said, "Sure, why not?" So he sold them to him. But then they said the island really didn't belong to him. It's because in the Indian culture, the land doesn't belong to any particular person. So really, this getting $27 was a bargain for the Indian. It was not really cheating him. But the Corona True and building of a temple was really the foundation of Baha'i administration in this country, because you know that they set up this, what they call it, Baha'i temple.
You cut out. If you could, you're saying they formed this Baha'i temple and then you cut out.
Baha'i Temple Unity Committee
Okay.
to help the building of a temple. But what happened, this was the same committee or the same organization eventually became National Spiritual Assembly of America. So you can see indirectly the contribution of Corona Truth at that point toward but that's a whole new stories. I think the other question that you mentioned, that the example that what Abdul Baha did, that we can use as example of his contribution to social justice, is encouragement of this marriage between Louis Gregory and Miss Matthews, that a black man marrying a white woman in 1912 was unheard of, and it was actually illegal in many states, as you know. And if you read the story of Louis Gregory and their marriage and all that, that's why often they were not even living together, because Louis Gregory was traveling, going and staying south a lot, and God help him if he would take his wife with him. Oh, I have another story about Louis Gregory. There was a man in New York that I met many years ago by the name Charles Wright. He was from Australia. He was a scientist. He came in 1920s, 1930s to America as a young man. And he was in Washington, D.C., and he saw a little ad in Washington Post that the Baha'i meeting at Smithsonian, a speaker, Fazl Mazandarani. So he was a young man, he had nothing else to do, he was free. He decided to go to this meeting and listen to this Fazl Mazandarani. I think for some of you may know Fazl Mazandarani was one of the greatest Baha'i scholar ever lived. So he went there and he listened to Fazl in that occasion, and he became Baha'i. And the interesting thing is that this man, he was a genius, and his specialty and his invention was mostly dealing with the aircraft, with the aerodynamic and all that. And the trouble is that he was a sweet man, especially after he became Baha'i. He became, I think, too spiritual. So whenever he had idea, he forget to patent them. So they stole most of his ideas. But still, if you Google him, Charles Wright, you would see that they refer to him, some of this airplane wing and the way it was designed, originally was designed by him in those days. Why am I telling you all this thing?
New Yorker.
What New York?
He was a New Yorker.
Yeah, he was a New Yorker. And then he was in love. Oh, and he was accompanying Louis Gregory in his traveling in the South. And he said, this is interesting the way he described it. He said, of course, he was a driver for Mr. Gregory, and he was a white man. And Mr. Gregory, well, of course, as a passenger, he would sit in the back seat. But they said when they get to any town, they would change places. Louis Gregory would come and sit behind the wheel, and he would sit in the back there as a passenger, because it's unheard of that the white man driving a black man around, they would kill both of them on the spot. So they go in town with this new arrangement. Louis Gregory would give his talk, he would drive the car in town, and then as they were leaving, again, they change and all that. So that's the example of his, I think this relation between black and white is a good example, John, that we can bring about.
It's an important point you brought up, though, about Louis Gregory's travels in America and how he relied on Mr. Ragg to make a lot of things possible. Because, there's some movies that try to discuss that topic. I'm not saying that they're like super accurate or they are, the picture of the past. However, there's a movie I watched, I remember, called The Green Book, which kind of discussed the interesting role of having people of African complexion going into the southern states and having a white driver. It was it's very uncomfortable to realize that for practically any reason you could be molested, harassed, and so forth. So the fact that Charles Ragg did that, it's not just an amazing service, but he also, I know, probably put himself in harm's way, just trying to assist the advancement of the cause in this way.
I tell you, actually, since you mentioned driving in the South, something else come to my mind. There was a wonderful lady, she's still alive. Her name was Wilma Ellis, she's the mother of Bob Henderson, former Secretary of National Assembly, and wonderful Baha'i teacher and all that. There was a time that her brother, Coswell, was a director of Louis Gregory Institute in the South, in South Carolina. So, and she and I were a member of a committee called National Black Teaching Committee, that there was doing lots of organization for this spreading of the faith, especially with all this new enrollment in the South that we were helping. So we flew to Columbia, South Carolina, I think, and his brother was supposed to pick us up, and somehow things got mixed up. You know, those days there was no iPhone, or telephone, cell phone, and all that. So we didn't meet him in the airport. Now imagine late at night, 11, 12 o'clock at night, we are in the southern state, and I have to rent a car and find my way to Louis Gregory place, Louis Gregory Institute. So we got in the car, and I noticed we are running out of gas. I mean, usually rental car is full of gas, but it was almost empty. So I remember we stopped someplace to get gas, and suddenly Wilma quietly went right under the front of the car. He went right on the bottom of the car. I said, "What are you, Wilma?" He said, "I don't want to get killed here." It's 12 o'clock at night with a white man. Well, I consider myself white. In the South Carolina, she was quite frightened. And so, but we managed to survive. And then we got the gas and we left the place. I didn't want to be next.
You said something, "I didn't want to be," and then you cut out.
I don't remember. It's too bad. You should pay attention more closely.
No.
I know it's an internet problem.
John, now we cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. I said it's a latency issue. That's probably the reason that it happened. So
Yeah.
no worries. We'll make do. So another question. There is from well, it's not really a question, but Regina Colston pointed out the sale of New York. She went to the Google value of the $20. Wait, in 1912? No, $20. It's maybe like 1700s, Regina. I think, I don't know what date it was. Maybe 1700s or maybe even earlier, like late 1600s. But yeah, $20 in 1912. She says today would be $547,000 and 850.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's from 1912. So
John, what I was trying to say was, or trying to write was $20,000 in 1912 equals 547, whatever I wrote.
okay.
$547,850.53.
Thank you. Well,
So for buying the Baha'i temple, it was pretty expensive. We can agree back then, the price that they paid. Yeah, good point. Thank you so much for your clarification, Regina. But yeah, it was very expensive what they paid. Korean True's group having to finance just the purchase of the land of the Baha'i temple. Wow, it's a lot of money. Well, do you actually, Regina, if you're still on, do you have a question for our speaker today? You usually have very good questions.
Well, not so much a question, John, and thank you, but a comment. To the scholar, it was so important that Abdul Baha visited all the places he visited. And A couple of them were Howard University and the NAACP. And when I interact with people from the NAACP, I mentioned to them that Abdul Baha spoke at their meetings because he valued their work, and he was making a statement about the unity of mankind. And that has such credibility with these communities because people understand he did it under threat of death. So our society was such that what Abdul Baha did with uniting mankind surely speaks that this is the religion of the ages.
Very good. Actually, a few years ago, New York Baha'i community were celebrating the coming of Abdul Baha to New York. And I think they arranged a bus tour that they would go different places. And then and they asked me as a local historian to talk about what did Abdul Baha said in that particular occasion. And one of the places that I remember I have to repeat Abdul Baha's talk and describe Abdul Baha's station was a church in Harlem called, I think, Mount Moriah Church, something like this. It was an interesting church. And I remember the church was full of people. It was they all come to listen to what we are doing, and especially then they serve fried chicken after the gathering. It was a wonderful occasion. And I remember at the middle of my talk, every time I make some statement, say, "Amen, amen." I was not used to this constant affirmation of what I was saying. And so this was actually, I'm sure it happened during Abdul Baha's time, that he, on a numerous occasion, he made the issue out of bringing the black and white together. And always remember, this was more than 100 years ago in America. We are still having issues and problems with social justice and all that. But then what he was advising, the advice he gave in terms of relation with the native Indians was quite interesting. I think he made a comment, if I'm not mistaken, that when this equality and recognition of the suffering and the plight of American Indian is done, is really beginning of the lesser peace. So, and we have quite a way to go before we get to that, but eventually we're going to make it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So again, for those of you who've been joining us, we're looking on Facebook and YouTube as well for your questions. And of course, those of you joining us on Zoom, please, if you have questions, we are very welcome. All questions are welcome now, if you have any. Of course, I know, Dr. Adia, people are, I feel, maybe blown away by some of the new facts that you've provided for them, because they probably never heard it before. Because again, someone like you who's been closer to the facts and studying them just geographically, it has been of, I believe, a blessing of yours. There is a question that comes up about where Abdul Baha stayed and such. So you're saying in the hotel that Abdul Baha went to, people like know the room and they'll go stay in it. Which hotel was that you were mentioning? Could you repeat that?
Yeah, the peace conference took place in the very fancy place called Lake. Of course,
okay, you're gonna have to repeat that. Lake what?
Lake Mohawk.
Lake Mohawk.
It's about 2 hours drive from New York City, north of New York City.
Okay.
And at the time, I just tell you this part also, Abdul Baha, along with Julia Thompson, Lua Gitzinger, and Mr. Mills, they took a train from Manhattan and they went to a place called New Paltz, which is a stop there. And then at that point, the organizer of the conference, peace conference, they had the carriage for them. and it took them, they had to go about 8 miles of riding to the Lake Mohonk Hotel. And it's, believe me, it's the most beautiful places, one of the most beautiful places I have ever visited. And I've been many places in my life. So I said it was so gorgeous that Abdul Baha began to sing, because loud in Persian language, then Juliet was singing in English, and then Lua would join, then Abdul Baha would join. So they had such a good old time, the 4 of them on the carriage, until they get to this hotel. And then I don't remember their room number, but I can find out for you if somebody's interested to go there. Maybe Gilbert would like to go and stay there. They have is a simple room, traditional room, is a small bed and is a desk and all that, It's not really fancy hotel, Marriott, or a place like that. So Baha'is do like to go stay there whenever they make a reservation. Kind of expensive, but good luck.
Yeah, and perhaps it may be a little more expensive if you ask for a particular room, right? They'll probably know why you're going there.
They may give you a discount if you tell them that you are a descendant of Abdul Baha. I'm kidding. No, please don't do that.
All right. Well, there's let's see. Still no other questions. People are soaking this in. So
that's fine. I could take a break. It's all right. Remember, I have another session. I need some rest for all my.
Well, that is actually a great point you brought that up. So everyone who's joining us right now, we have in almost a little over an hour's time from this moment, we're going to be having a part 2 for Tahirih, the presentation about Tahirih and her contemporaries. This will be occurring at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Eastern Seaboard, NYC time, New York City time. So if you're able to join us, we will be resuming that as well. This was part 2 for Abdul Baha, New York City. That will be part 2 for Tahirih and her contemporaries. Actually, if you could give a little bit of info, what will we be talking about in the hour that's coming up?
Actually, my talk this afternoon is going to be so unique. Believe me, even I surprised myself when I was doing research on the subject. This Abdul Baha's trips and this and that, or life of Tahirih, we can always research and do it. But what I did for this afternoon session and for the book actually I wrote together with Hilary Chapman is that to find out what else was happening in America and in Europe while Tahirih was doing her thing in Persia. I believe that there is a what you may call it, a spirit of age, that something was happening in the air. The same spirit that was moving people like Tahirih, Quddus, Mullah Hussein, and others, the same spirit was moving people in America and Europe. So I found out that there is a group of women, and I'm not going to give you their name right now. It's a surprise. You come back 1:30, so I will tell you. And then, yes, Tatiana, you want? They talk like Tahirih, they write like Tahirih, and they all were this great expectation that something is boiling, something is going to take place. And we'll be talking about those women, like the one who found and formed what they call it, Church of Scientists. It's a very famous. And okay, I will tell you all about this.
Yeah, Church of Christian Science. That's
yes,
I think their main church is in Boston, Massachusetts.
That one, and then we talk about the Sojourner Truth. We talk about the whole bunch of few other ladies that they were instrumental on part of the second awakening that took place in 1780s, 90s in this country.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And again, for those of you, that is for this session that's coming up in an hour from now. There is a question I have to tell you, Dr. Adia, from Regina Colston. She also has something to tell you as well, in addition to that. So Regina, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, John.
Mhm.
Dr. Adea, would you speak to the issue of Abdul Baha coming to America? That, and I'm speaking in reference to the spiritual dynamic, that where the faith is, the atoms in the universe are transformed. And we see that it takes time for change, but his efforts in reaching everyone and traveling to these major cities created an energy that helped manifest change in America. Would you speak to the dynamic of his spiritual presence in North America, our country?
It's amazing that in terms of attention that Abdul Baha got because of his personality, because of his teaching, because of his spirituality, was very much similar to that Bab and Tahir got in 19th century. We never had this much recognition and appeal to public since the martyrdom of the Bab and Tahir. You know, at that time, this is another subject that we can talk for hours, that at that time, the appearance of the Bab creates such an excitement in the Western world and Western press and American press that only match with the coming of Abdul Baha to America, that the hundreds and hundreds of articles appear all over the country. Especially you have to know at that time, New York, for example, you know, Abdul Baha stayed in New York for almost 89 days, 1/3 of all the time that he was in America. And when New York Herald Tribune or New York Times or Associated Press or United would carry an article about Abdul Baha, immediately was copied all over the country, and 200 other newspapers, because, you know, local newspaper in Wisconsin or in Minnesota or other places, they were excited to have some good news. And the good news was always coming from New York or Chicago or a place like this. So it really, his talks and his appearance and his presentation did affected large number of the people in this country. But unfortunately, of course, there was no much follow-up of his trips, and you know, we had a small number of leavers. We had so much thing to do, but we have come a long way, but still we have a long way to go. That's my answer.
Thank you.
Sure, dear. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see all of you, and looking forward to see you this afternoon after I go out in this cold weather of New York and have something to eat and get some energy, come back and meet all of you, hopefully all over again. Thank you.
Yes. And to close out, could you please provide people where they can learn more about the subject of Abdul Baha's travels in America and New York? Maybe sources like your book, etc.
Yeah, I think one of the there's a book that we have written which is available in Baha'i bookstore, available in the Amazon, and been translated to Persian and Spanish, and it's called Abdul Baha in New York. It's has been well received, and we are updating it and we are revising certain part of it, and we're going to have a new edition available commemorating his ascension next year. And if nothing else, if you have some free time, go to the website. Abdul Baha in New York has lots and lots of pictures and stories and all that. And there was one part in there, it looked like it's not working anymore. I tried a few days ago. We call it a virtual tour. That because for those who, maybe we can get it going again. For those who cannot come to New York and visit some of these major places, we have a video and somebody talk and describe the place and mention what Abdul Baha said and what took place. So this was all part of that website. And thanks to Tatiana and her son, who is a programmer, we put that together.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Well, as you said, it's a good time for us to break. And we are, again, from Clearwater Baha'is on YouTube, Baha'i Center of Clearwater on Facebook. You're able to watch this and share this video. Please visit those websites, as you are more than happy to copy a video and send it to whoever you need to. Please remember, we've got our session in an hour. It will be about Tahira and her contemporaries. You can also, if you're watching this after the fact, find it on our YouTube and our Facebook. Again, thank you, Dr. Adia. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Thank you, John.